Ho, ho, ho! Hello everyone, it's December the 6th and time to open up another window on the TooFatLardies Advent Calendar for 2022. And behind this window for the 6th of December, the question is, what comes first in starting a wargaming project? Figures, movies, books, or something else? Well, that's kind of a question which probably is going to be answered by reference to different projects. I don't think, for me anyway, there's a one-size-fits-all explanation. It's not always books, it's not always movies, it's not always figures, but it has been each of those at various different times and other things as well. So we've talked a lot of times on the Oddcast and other Advent windows from previous years about inspiration. And I think inspiration strikes in different ways in different projects. And it partly depends on the size of the project, who you're enjoying the project with, and also the direction that you want to take the project in as well. I think there's certainly projects where I've been inspired by books I've been reading to start creating historical wargaming armies and forces and painting up miniature figures. And that's probably one of the leading ways in which I've been inspired to start a project. Certainly the armies I've built up in the late 17th century have all been, I think, started by reference to reading about the history of that period, and in particular about the tactics and the ways in which armies were formed, drilled, trained, deployed, and how they fought. So books like The Anatomy of Victory by Brent Nosworthy, David Chandler's Art of War in the Age of Marlborough, those were really my lodestones in the late 80s for creating the first of my late 17th century armies in 28mm. And that's continued because over the years I've found out more about the period. I've read more widely across different participants in the 9 Years' War, and also the War of the Spanish Succession, and the various other conflicts which those participants like William III and Louis XIV were engaged in. And I think books have always been at the heart of really understanding the relative merits of the combatants on the battlefield. I think also when we spent a long time at Lard Island recreating the First World War, probably from round about, I'm going to say 2008 to kind of 2012, 2013. A lot of the work that we did in creating Mud and Blood, and Richard really put me onto many of the accounts that he really enjoyed about the First World War, in particular those written by Paddy Griffiths. And I really enjoyed the books of memoirs by soldiers who fought on all different sides in the Western Front, French, German and British, and various American accounts as well. All personal accounts of the soldiers who were fighting, and they were really resonant with what we were trying to create in that set of rules, which was fairly small-scale skirmish in the context of the First World War, but always something which we could look down and find the big men in those engagements, and we could link the tabletop events for the big men with actually things which happened on the battlefield. I remember reading a lot at one point about the Somme and High Wood and the engagements around High Wood, and a lot of the personal stories in the accounts, both official histories, memoirs and letters, they really infused the war games we had on the Somme and later in Passchendaele as well, with a lot of experience and the first-hand participation of soldiers who'd been there. And I think without that link between the war games and history through books, those experiences would have been, much less vivid and much less enjoyable. So certainly books have been one way in which I've repeatedly turned to inspiration, but they're not the only way, as I think the window question has suggested. I think certainly one of the things that I've been inspired about a lot has been figure ranges. There's nothing really like seeing a new range of figures, or perhaps an old range of figures that you've rediscovered, or indeed figures that you've put away in a box and you just haven't looked at for years and years, and looking at them and really being inspired to do something. And I think I posted on Twitter earlier in the year that was one of the big inspirations behind my current interest in trying to recreate a small-scale skirmish game based in Japan, round about the 17th century in the Tokugawa shogunate. And that was really infused by some of the fantastic figures which were sculpted by Ali Morrison in the late 80s that I'd collected a lot of but never really done anything with, and I'd rediscovered in having one of my periodic clear-outs. And those figures are just wonderful, and they were largely behind the genesis of When the Last Sword is Drawn, which is our samurai skirmish game, or Japanese skirmish game, which I've been taking round various shows during the course of 2022. And there's just something when I look at those figures that just inspires me to want to create a game in which the different weaponry and different characters of the figures can really come to the forefront, and a skirmish game is just ideal for doing that. The figures kind of are so characterful, I feel, that they inspire the game just by their own presence on the tabletop. But also another aspect I've really enjoyed creating games on over the years has been my love of sort of visual arts. I really am a bit of a sucker for an art gallery, as many people would be able to tell you. I love nothing more than going to a different town and visiting an art gallery and just really enjoying some of the all different sorts of art which you can find there. And that was one of the inspirations for one of my favourite projects, which was doing things in 2mm a few years ago now, probably about 6 years ago now, but still continuing. Was really creating games in the 17th century which were inspired by the visual aspects of battle paintings, which had been created often for wealthy patrons, which I'm sure I've spoken about on various advent calendars and on the Oddcast before. I really think that there's a lot of mileage which you can get in historical war games by reference to contemporary depictions of warfare, and trying to link in the experience of what the painter was seeing and trying to replicate on canvas with the game that you're trying to create on the tabletop. And I think there's lots of fun and interesting things that you can do to try and link in those two aspects, the game that you're seeing as against the historical image which was being prepared by somebody hundreds of years ago. I really like the juxtaposition between those two elements. And I think that for me, over all of the different things that I've been inspired by, what comes first in starting the War Games project is always thinking about what it's going to look like at the end. And that's a big aspect for me in enjoying the hobby, is what is the final product going to look like? What's the final game going to look like? It's got to play well. It's got to have some connection with the past, with history. I think those are important aspects of wargaming for me. But I think having something which represents and is respectful for history is also making it look right, trying to get that connection between what's on the tabletop and what a contemporary might have seen or might have been able to recognise as a combat which is happening. That's certainly something that I've enjoyed. So that would be my answer. All types of inspiration are welcome at Roundwood Towers, but the one thing which I think consistently is something which I've started with is really the image of what the project will be like once it's completed.